Everyone thought they knew who the villain was. They were wrong, because the truth hiding inside the Dutton Ranch Season 1 finale is darker than anyone expected. And it changes the way you see every single character. A father who destroyed his own daughter, a son forced to carry a secret that isn't his, a death that might not be what it looks like, and a family standing on land soaked in blood, drugs, and 15 years of lies. Season 2 is coming, and nothing will ever be simple again. Dutton Ranch has quietly become one of the most talked about present-day Yellowstone spin-offs, and the Season 1 finale proved exactly why. For weeks, fans believed Bula was the villain of this story, but Episode 9 flipped that idea upside down, revealing a truth so painful it reshapes everything we thought we understood about this family. Today we're breaking down what really happened, who the real villain is, what that shocking finale means, and what Season 2 could bring. Stay until the end, because one theory in this video might be the wildest prediction you've heard about this show yet. For most of Season 1, Bula looked like the coldest person in the story. She gave orders, she kept secrets, she controlled everyone around her like pieces on a chessboard. It was easy to paint her as the villain, especially with how calmly she handled dangerous situations that would break most people. But the finale forced us to look closer, and what we found was not a woman born cruel. It was a woman who was broken long before we ever met her. The real villains, it turns out, were never Bula herself. They were the men who surrounded her, who used her, who blamed her for things that were never her fault, and who built their own power on top of her pain. Her own father sits at the center of this. Instead of protecting his daughter, he accused her of, in his own twisted words, getting herself raped, and then forced an innocent man named Mariano to take the blame for something he didn't do. Think about that for a second. A father, the one person who is supposed to shield his child from the world, chose instead to humiliate her and punish someone else in her place. That single decision poisoned everything that came after it. Mariano, forced into an impossible position, agreed to take the blame, but he likely never had a real choice in the matter. He was cornered, and cornered men do desperate things. He left his son, Waqen, behind with the family and fled the country with his wife, hoping distance would protect them. But peace never found him. His wife was killed, and just like that, he was left utterly alone in Mexico with nothing but grief and rage to keep him company. That is not the origin story of a random criminal. That is the origin story of a man built entirely out of loss. He lost his freedom, his name, his wife, and his home, and somewhere along the way, all of that pain curdled into something darker. And who did he choose to take it out on? Bula. The same woman who was already a victim of the very lie that destroyed his life. He turned his grief into control, and slowly, quietly, he built himself into the shadow that runs the ranch from behind the curtain. This is why the finale hits so hard. It doesn't give us a cartoon villain to hate easily. It gives us a tragedy, layered with real human wreckage, where almost everyone involved is both a victim and a perpetrator at the same time. And that's exactly why so many fans are already predicting Season 2 will be even messier, even more emotional, because there is no clean side to root for anymore. Every character is compromised. Every character has blood on their hands, whether they meant for it to happen or not. And that is precisely what makes this story so addictive to watch. Here's where the story gets even more disturbing. 15 years ago, during a brutal drought that threatened to destroy everything the family had built, Mariano approached Bula with an offer. Not a kind one, not a rescue. An offer built on desperation, the kind that sounds like salvation in the moment, but ends up chaining you for the rest of your life. From that day forward, drugs were smuggled hidden inside cattle, transported quietly from Mexico into Texas, using the ranch as the perfect cover. Nobody suspects a cattle operation. Nobody looks twice at trucks moving livestock across state lines. It was the perfect crime, hiding in plain sight, disguised as an honest family business. And that single decision is the reason the ranch and its legacy survived at all. Without that deal, there's a good chance the family loses everything during that drought. So in a horrifying way, the empire we've been watching all season was built on a foundation of trafficking and silence. Bula didn't want this life. She was desperate when she agreed, trying to save what her family had spent generations building. But once you make a deal like that, there's no clean way out. She tried to escape the arrangement after her father died, hoping that with him gone, the entire nightmare might finally end. It didn't, because Mariano was still out there, and his pain had transformed into something far more dangerous than grief. He wasn't going anywhere, and neither was the operation he had built his entire remaining life around. Bula found herself trapped between three men who each wanted something different from her. Mariano, who wanted control and revenge disguised as business. Rob Will, whose motivations remain murky and threatening. And now, Waqen, the son who was raised in the middle of all of this without ever fully understanding the truth of his own father's past. Imagine growing up surrounded by wealth, danger, and secrets, never realizing that you are, in many ways, a pawn in a war that started before you were even born. That is Waqen's reality, and it's about to explode. Because near the end of Season 1, Mariano makes a chilling request. He asks Waqen to kill his own brother, Rob Will, so that control of the ranch can pass entirely into Waqen's hands, giving Mariano even tighter grip over the entire smuggling operation. This is no longer just a family drama. This is a war for power, dressed up in ranch boots and family dinners, but bloody underneath every polite conversation. And then it happens. Rob Will is found dead on the ground, a bullet in his head, his life ended in an instant. A black car speeds away from the scene, and moments later, we see Waqen sitting inside a car, crying. Every single clue seems to point directly at him. He had motive, he had opportunity. His own father had asked him to do exactly this. On the surface, it looks completely solved. Case closed. Waqen killed his brother under his father's orders, and the guilt is eating him alive in that back seat. But something about this doesn't sit right, and it's worth slowing down here, because television rarely hands you the obvious answer without a twist hiding underneath it. Waqen has spent the entire season being shown as someone with a conscience, someone who does shady things because he's cornered, not because he enjoys cruelty. Even when he's forced into uncomfortable situations, there's always a flicker of hesitation in him, a sign that he isn't built the same way his father is. That matters. Because killing your own brother, even a half-brother, even one who would kill you first given the chance, is not a small thing to carry. It leaves marks. It changes people permanently. And the theory gaining traction among fans is that Waqen did not actually pull that trigger. Maybe he confronted Rob Will exactly as instructed. Maybe he even raised the weapon. But in the final second, he couldn't bring himself to finish it. Maybe he let his brother go, walked away, and somebody else entirely stepped in and finished what Waqen couldn't. If that's true, then that emotional breakdown we see in the car isn't guilt over murder at all. It's something rawer, an adrenaline crash, after nearly killing someone he was supposed to hate, relief and horror slamming into him at the exact same time. It was a breakdown, not necessarily grief, and definitely not confirmation of guilt. But here's the part that makes this even more interesting. Even if Waqen is innocent of pulling that trigger, Season 2 probably won't rush to clear his name. In fact, everyone around him, including Mariano himself, will likely continue to believe that Waqen is the one who did it. And Waqen may not correct that narrative at all. Why would he? Believing he's capable of that kind of violence gives him leverage, respect, and fear from the people around him. Exactly the kind of power he needs to survive in this world. It's a dangerous game to play, letting people believe you're a killer when you're not. But in a family like this, sometimes a false reputation is the only armor you have. As Season 2 unfolds, there's a strong possibility that Waqen begins to see his father differently. Right now, Mariano is functioning as the shadow architect behind everything, a man so consumed by decades of pain that he can no longer separate revenge from strategy. But there's only so long someone can watch a parent spiral into that kind of obsession before questioning whether loyalty is worth the cost. Waqen has always had a soft spot for Bula, and that detail matters more than it might seem on the surface. Throughout the story, he's quietly helped her, protected certain secrets, and shown flashes of genuine care that don't match the cold, calculating persona his father wants him to embody. That connection could be the thread that eventually pulls him away from Mariano entirely. Picture this. As Mariano's grip tightens and his decisions grow more reckless, more paranoid, more willing to sacrifice anyone in his path, Waqen starts to realize that staying loyal to his father means becoming exactly the kind of monster that destroyed his family in the first place. At some point, loyalty has to break, and when it does, the most powerful and heartbreaking version of this story has Waqen choosing to side with Bula instead of his own blood. But here's where the tragedy deepens even further, because Bula has no idea about any of this. She doesn't know that Waqen may not be the one who killed Rob Will. She doesn't know about the quiet loyalty he's held for her over the years. All she knows is the story everyone believes, that Waqen is a killer working under his father's orders. And that misunderstanding could lead to one of the most devastating scenes this franchise has ever produced. Imagine Bula, believing she's protecting herself and her family, ultimately being the one to end Waqen's life, not realizing he was quietly trying to help her the entire time. Imagine his final words as he falls, not accusing her, not begging for his life, but instead whispering something that reveals the truth too late. A confession meant only for her, arriving in the last seconds he has left. If Season 2 delivers a scene anywhere close to this, it won't just be dramatic television. It will be the emotional gut punch that defines the entire series going forward. Whether the writers take the story exactly in this direction or twist it somewhere even darker, one thing is certain: Waqen's arc is nowhere near finished, and the truth about Rob Will's death is far from settled. While the Bula and Mariano storyline dominates the darker side of this world, Beth and Rip have been chasing something much simpler and much harder to hold on to: peace. They wanted to start fresh, build something new, away from the chaos of their old lives. Instead, the very moment they decide to move forward, they find a body on their land. That single image says everything about this family's luck. Every attempt to move toward peace gets pulled straight back into violence. Alongside that horror, they're dealing with Carter, a boy who behaves far younger than his age suggests, someone who still doesn't fully understand the world he's been thrown into. And now Carter has been kidnapped, along with a pregnant girl named Oriana who has almost nobody left to turn to. Season 2 is expected to center heavily around the desperate search to find Carter and bring him home safely. From the beginning, Beth and Rip have struggled to connect with him the way a real family should. When Carter first entered their lives, they didn't fully embrace him, didn't know how to open up to a kid carrying so much trauma of his own. And now that they're finally trying, Carter is the one struggling to accept them as parents, pushing back against affection he never learned to trust. But everything happening with Mariano is about to change that dynamic completely. There's a strong theory forming that Beth may be the one to ultimately confront and possibly kill Mariano, not out of politics or business, but out of pure maternal rage over the fact that he dared to kidnap Carter. Beth has never been someone who reacts calmly to threats against the people she loves, and kidnapping her son crosses a line that guarantees retaliation. Yes, taking down a man like Mariano is easier said than done, especially given how deeply embedded he is in this world of trafficking and control. But given Beth's history and her willingness to go to extreme lengths, this feels like one of the most likely outcomes waiting in Season 2. This family has spent 15 years building something out of nothing, and there's no version of this story where they simply let a man like Mariano walk away after devastating everything they've fought to protect. Once Beth and Rip manage to rescue Carter, something important is expected to shift permanently. Carter will likely finally understand that even when he pushes them away, even when he doesn't want them in his life, they are still willing to do absolutely anything to keep him safe. That kind of unconditional protection is rare for a boy who has spent his life being abandoned or overlooked, and witnessing it firsthand could be the turning point that finally makes Carter see Beth and Rip as real parents instead of strangers he's stuck with. That transformation would mark one of the most emotionally satisfying arcs the show has built so far, turning a fractured, reluctant family into something genuine and earned rather than forced. Meanwhile, there's the situation with Oriana, who we learn is pregnant with Carter's baby. She wanted to run away with him, desperate to escape everything closing in around them, but for now, that dream remains completely out of reach. With her father gone and her future uncertain, Oriana doesn't have the luxury of running anywhere. She needs stability, and more importantly, she needs Carter to grow up fast and be present for her, no matter how overwhelmed he feels. And Carter, despite his age and his instinct to throw a tantrum when things get hard, will likely be forced to mature quickly under the weight of impending fatherhood. Many fans are already predicting that Carter and Oriana are being set up as the next generation's version of Beth and Rip, a young couple hardened by circumstance, bonded by survival, destined to build something lasting out of chaos. Watching that relationship develop across season 2 could become one of the most compelling threads of the entire show, especially if the writers lean into the parallels between this young couple and the original pairing that made this franchise so beloved in the first place. There's something deeply cinematic about watching history repeat itself, not through fate, but through two people choosing each other in the middle of an impossible situation. Here's something that speaks volumes about how much people love this show. Dutton Ranch was renewed for a second season before the first season had even finished airing. That kind of confidence from a network doesn't happen for shows that are only doing okay. It happens when a story catches fire, when audiences are talking, theorizing, and refusing to look away. Despite that renewal, an official release date hasn't been announced yet. Given how big of a hit this show became on Paramount, it's unlikely the network will want to make fans wait an unreasonable amount of time. There's a strong possibility this project becomes a priority, with speculation pointing toward a potential spring 2027 release. Whenever it arrives, everything is set up for an explosive continuation. Waqen's true role in Rob Will's death, Bula's uncertain future now that she may be forced to choose between loyalty and survival, Mariano's unraveling grip on an empire built from trafficking and revenge, and the desperate fight to save Carter while Beth and Rip attempt to finally become the family they always wanted to be. Every storyline left hanging from that finale feels like a loaded gun waiting to go off in season 2, and the writers have given themselves so many directions to explore that almost anything feels possible at this point. Will Waqen finally reveal the truth about what really happened that night? Will Bula ever learn who her son truly is beneath the lies everyone believes? Will Beth finally get her long-awaited confrontation with Mariano? And will Carter and Oriana manage to build something real out of the wreckage surrounding them? These are the questions that will define whether Season 2 becomes the defining chapter of this entire universe. There's one small moment buried inside that finale that deserves far more attention than it got, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it. When Waqen is shown crying inside that car after Rob Will's death, the camera lingers just a little too long on his hands. Not his face. His hands. In storytelling, that kind of visual choice is rarely accidental. Directors don't waste lingering shots on body parts unless they're trying to plant a clue the audience will only understand later. If Waqen truly pulled that trigger himself, the expected reaction would be shock, maybe even numbness, the kind of frozen stillness that comes from doing something irreversible. But trembling hands paired with tears usually signal something closer to relief mixed with horror, the physical response of someone who almost did something unthinkable and then didn't. That single detail supports the theory that Waqen hesitated, that his brother's death was not entirely his doing, and that the guilt eating him alive isn't guilt over murder, but guilt over almost becoming his father. There's also something worth examining in how Mariano reacts once he learns Rob Will is dead. He never actually confirms that Waqen was the one who did it. He simply lets the assumption exist, allows it to spread, and uses it to tighten his control over his son. That's a very specific kind of manipulation, one built entirely on silence rather than lies. Mariano doesn't need to say Waqen is a killer. He just needs everyone else to believe it. Because a son who believes he's capable of murder is a son who is easier to control, easier to guilt, easier to keep quiet. If Season 2 confirms this theory, it reframes Mariano as something even more chilling than a grieving man turned criminal. It reframes him as someone actively engineering his own son's psychological collapse to maintain power, which is a far darker and more calculated form of villainy than anything we've seen from him so far. And then there's Bula's reaction to Rob Will's death, which is oddly restrained given everything she's been through. She doesn't scream, she doesn't collapse, she simply absorbs the information the way someone absorbs news they've been quietly expecting for years. That restraint could mean she's simply exhausted from decades of tragedy, but it could also hint that she suspects far more about what's really happening within her own family than she's letting anyone see. Bula has survived this long by controlling her reactions in front of dangerous men, and there's a real possibility she's already piecing together a version of the truth long before the show reveals it to us directly. While an official Season 2 trailer hasn't dropped yet, The way this story has been building gives us a fairly clear map of what early promotional material is likely to tease once it arrives. Expect the first images to focus heavily on Carter, most likely showing him in captivity or in the immediate aftermath of his rescue, because that storyline carries the most urgent emotional stakes heading into the new season. Networks tend to lead with whatever generates the most immediate concern from viewers, and a kidnapped child sitting alongside a pregnant, vulnerable young woman checks every box for that kind of urgency. Alongside that, it would make sense for early marketing to hint at tension between Waqen and Mariano without giving away the full truth, likely through a single loaded glance or a tense conversation shot in shadow, the kind of imagery studios use specifically to fuel fan speculation without confirming anything outright. If the show wants to protect the twist about who really killed Rob Will, expect the marketing team to lean hard into ambiguity here, possibly even using misleading editing to make audiences believe the obvious explanation is correct, only to subvert it later in the season. That's a common strategy for shows sitting on a major reveal, and Dutton Ranch has already proven it isn't afraid to play with audience assumptions. Beth is another character worth watching closely in any promotional material. If there's any hint of her holding a weapon, standing over Mariano's territory, or exchanging a tense confrontation with anyone connected to the trafficking operation, that would strongly support the theory that she becomes directly involved in taking him down. Marketing teams often use these kinds of visuals specifically to hint at a satisfying confrontation without spoiling exactly how it unfolds. And finally, watch for any brief appearance of Oriana looking noticeably further along in her pregnancy, which would confirm that Season 2 doesn't waste time and jumps forward enough to show real consequences of everything set up in the finale. Trailers rarely lie about timeline jumps, since audiences tend to notice and appreciate that kind of visual continuity, so any obvious change in her appearance would all but confirm the season picks up with real stakes already in motion rather than resetting the clock. Here's a theory that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention yet, and it might be the most disturbing possibility of them all. What if Rob Will isn't actually dead? Think about how convenient this death was for absolutely everyone except Rob Will himself. Mariano wanted him gone to consolidate power. Waqen was pressured to appear responsible for it. And the show has now built an entire narrative foundation around a death that we never actually see confirmed beyond a body on the ground and a car driving away. No autopsy, no funeral, no definitive closure. In television storytelling, that combination of details is often a setup for a return rather than a permanent exit, especially in a genre built around family betrayal, hidden identities, and slow-burning revenge. If Rob Will faked his death, or was helped into disappearing by someone with their own agenda, imagine the chaos that unleashes in Season 2. Waqen believing he's responsible for a death that never happened. Mariano celebrating a victory that was never real. And Bula, already suspicious, potentially being the one person who suspects the truth long before anyone else catches on. A returning Rob Will wouldn't just be dramatic for the sake of shock value, it would completely destabilize the fragile power structure Mariano has spent so long building, forcing every character to confront exactly how far they were willing to go based on a lie. Even if this theory doesn't play out exactly this way, the mere possibility highlights just how unstable this world really is. Nothing in Dutton Ranch has been simple so far, and every reveal has only exposed deeper layers of manipulation hiding underneath the surface. Season 2 has the potential to either confirm the darkest theories fans have built or shatter them entirely with a twist nobody saw coming. Either way, one thing feels certain. This family's fight for peace is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be the most explosive one yet. There's a version of this story that hasn't been fully explored yet, and it centers entirely on Bula's next move once the truth starts unraveling around her. For years, she's been forced to survive by staying 2 steps ahead of everyone, playing along with Mariano while quietly protecting whatever pieces of her family she still had left. But surviving and winning are 2 very different things, and Season 2 feels like the moment she finally stops simply enduring and starts fighting back. Consider what she's actually lost at this point. Her father betrayed her in the cruelest way imaginable. Mariano turned his own trauma into a weapon aimed directly at her life. Rob Will is gone. whether by Waqen's hand or someone else's. And the one person who might have quietly been on her side this whole time, Waqen, is the same person everyone believes murdered her son. If Bula begins connecting these threads herself, piecing together inconsistencies in the story she's been told, she could become the most dangerous person in this entire narrative. Not through violence at first, but through information. She's spent decades learning how to read dangerous men, how to anticipate betrayal before it happens, and that skill set doesn't disappear just because grief clouds her judgment. There's a real possibility that Season 2 shows her quietly building her own countermove against Mariano, using the same patience and control that made her seem like a villain in Season 1. Imagine her allowing everyone to believe she's still grieving, still passive, still trapped, while she's actually gathering the exact leverage she needs to dismantle the operation that's controlled her for 15 years. That kind of slow-burning revenge arc would completely reframe her character, transforming her from someone perceived as cold into someone who is simply playing the longest game in the entire story. And if she eventually crosses paths again with Waqen, armed with a clearer understanding of what actually happened the night Rob Will died, that confrontation could go in a completely different direction than the tragic one many fans are predicting. Instead of killing him in a moment of misplaced rage, she might instead offer him something he's never had before, the chance to finally choose a side without his father controlling the outcome. Every villain built entirely out of grief eventually reaches a breaking point, and Mariano feels closer to that edge than the show has shown us so far. His entire identity has been rebuilt around control, revenge, and the belief that everyone around him owes him something for what he lost. But that kind of foundation is inherently unstable, because grief doesn't actually disappear once you gain power. It just hides underneath it, waiting to resurface the moment things stop going according to plan. And things are about to stop going according to plan. If Waqen begins pulling away, if Bula starts quietly working against him, and if Beth becomes an active threat determined to make him pay for taking Carter, Mariano suddenly finds himself surrounded on every side by people he underestimated. Men like Mariano don't handle losing control gracefully. They tend to become more reckless, more paranoid, more willing to make dangerous decisions simply to prove they're still in charge. That kind of unraveling often leads directly to mistakes, the kind of mistakes that eventually expose everything he's built. There's also an emotional layer worth considering here. Whatever love Mariano once had for his son before all of this began hasn't necessarily vanished completely. Somewhere underneath the manipulation and control, there could still be a flicker of a father who remembers holding his son as a baby before the world turned him into someone unrecognizable. If Season 2 allows even a brief moment of humanity to break through Mariano's armor right before everything collapses around him, it would make his eventual downfall feel earned rather than simply satisfying. The best villains aren't destroyed, they're revealed. And Mariano's story feels like it's building toward exactly that kind of reveal. A man finally forced to see clearly what his own pain turned him into, right as it all comes crashing down. Bringing Carter home safely will likely come at a price far steeper than anyone expects. Rescue missions and stories like this rarely happen cleanly, and given how deeply Mariano's operation is embedded into the world surrounding the ranch, getting Carter back probably means confronting exactly how dangerous these people really are. Beth and Rip may have to make choices during that rescue that haunt them long after Carter is safe. Decisions made in desperation that blur the line between protecting their family and becoming just as ruthless as the people they're fighting against. That's an important shift to watch for, because up until now, Beth and Rip have largely been reacting to violence rather than initiating it. If Season 2 forces them to cross that line themselves, it changes the entire tone of their story, turning them from victims trying to protect their family into active participants in the same cycle of violence that's consumed everyone else in this world. There's also the emotional aftermath to consider once Carter is finally safe. Trauma doesn't disappear the moment danger ends, and a boy who already struggled to trust the people trying to love him is likely to come back from this experience even more guarded, even more difficult to reach. The real test for Beth and Rip won't just be the rescue itself. It will be everything that comes after. The slow, difficult work of helping Carter heal from something that could easily break him permanently. And that's where Oriana becomes even more important to this story than she might initially seem. She's not just a plot device tied to Carter's future, she's potentially the one person capable of understanding exactly what he's going through, since she's been through her own version of loss and fear throughout this entire ordeal. If the show handles this correctly, the bond between Carter and Oriana could become the emotional backbone of season 2. Two young people learning to heal together in the middle of a world that keeps trying to break them apart. Step back far enough, and everything happening across every storyline in Dutton Ranch starts pointing toward the same central theme. The idea that trauma passed down through generations doesn't simply disappear, it multiplies unless someone finally chooses to stop it. Bula inherited pain from her father. Mariano inherited devastation from the lie that destroyed his life. Waqen inherited a legacy of violence he never asked for. And Carter is on the verge of inheriting exactly the same cycle unless Beth and Rip manage to break it before it's too late. That's what makes this story feel bigger than a simple crime drama disguised as a family saga. Every character is essentially fighting the same war, whether they realize it or not, the war against becoming exactly what hurt them in the first place. Season 2 has the opportunity to answer whether any of these characters can actually break that cycle, or whether Dutton Ranch is building toward a much darker conclusion where history simply repeats itself no matter how hard anyone fights against it. Given how carefully this show has layered its storytelling so far, refusing to give easy answers or clean villains, it feels unlikely that Season 2 will offer a simple, tidy resolution. Instead, expect a season built on hard choices, blurred morality, and consequences that linger long after each individual conflict resolves. Whether it's Bula finally confronting the truth about her son, Mariano facing the collapse of everything he built out of grief, Beth crossing a line she can never uncross, or Carter and Oriana trying to build something new out of inherited chaos, every thread points toward the same question. Can this family finally become something different? Or are they simply destined to keep repeating the same mistakes that built this ranch in the first place? That question alone is enough to make Season 2 one of the most anticipated returns of the year, and it's exactly why fans can't stop talking about where this story goes next. One thing is certain, this family is far from finding the peace they've been chasing, and the truth still hiding beneath every lie in this story is only getting more dangerous the closer we get to Season 2. So tell me, do you think Waqen really pulled that trigger, or is there a darker truth waiting to be uncovered? Drop your theories below, because this conversation is only just getting started.